So I'm recording. So.
Great. Perfect.
Well, now,
yeah, no, like I said, I think that I'm probably 100% fine with you posting publicly. I have a tendency to get on a soapbox and say things, and I work in a field. I work in a field where there are certainly things that can come back to bite me. So I would ask that I get to review a recording before it goes public, but I'll intend to say only things that I would be happy to have in public. I'm not super publicly religious in general with my spiritual beliefs in general. It's hard in the arts because there's a lot of, arts in general tend to be people who are a little bit more skeptical on some sides of things. So
yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I'll give you the general rundown. 30 now, majored in music education, taught for many, many years. I work with a group now here in Phoenix, Arizona, and I travel around a lot. I do a lot of training of teachers. I do a lot of training from young people up through adults. I have a retirement community I work with. I've worked in churches in and out throughout my entire life. The main thing I want to talk about today is just sort of the transition between where Jordan Peterson is and where you are. And that's where I feel like I'm starting to live in this kind of gray zone between the two. So the basics of the spiritual journey were, as a child, dad's side of the family was Catholic. I would say we're Christians, Christmas and Easter, and that was pretty much it. And my mom's side of the family was religious and spiritual, but we never really went to church much. So I had a long conversation with my mom a little while ago about our family's religious and spiritual background, and just saying, for me, as coming from the hyper rational side, it seemed like, you have your school, and you have your math class, and you have your French class, and you have your science class, and church, beyond all the metaphysical stuff, put that all in a box. You could say that's how to be a good person class.
Okay.
So you have that in addition to everything else. Yeah. And that as a society and as a family and people like me who didn't come up in the church, that we eradicated how to be a good person class and said, well, maybe the church isn't very good at that. We said, okay, so who's going to be substitute teaching how to be a good person class? Oh, don't worry about it. We just won't have that class anymore. And then 20 years later, all of a sudden, people aren't very good people anymore. And we start wondering where all these problems in society are coming from and why I'm young, I'm tapped into the culture. I've seen in the last 5 to 6 years the rise of these nihilistic, depressive, mental illness, suicide type memes coming up online. And if you search Reddit, one of the top memes any day is something joking about killing yourself and feeling absolutely no meaning in your life. And that wasn't a thing 5 or 10 years ago. It was not. And they're humorous. I mean, it's lighthearted. It's not necessarily a call for help. They're made in a humorous way, but those jokes weren't as common 10 years ago, definitely, but a generation ago, way more so. And so I'm in this place now. I got through college, got through my 20s, worked in churches a lot because I'm a musician. So, the opportunities arise, UCC churches, Reformed churches, Methodist churches, plenty of different congregations, sang in plenty of Catholic churches right now, looking at joining a Lutheran church, lots of different options there. And always felt like the community was wonderful and always had trouble connecting to anything beyond the gathering with a group of nice people who are trying to be nicer people. Mm-hmm. Which seemed to have a lot of value, but beyond that, it was, I felt connection to the music, but not necessarily the deeper meaning beneath that. And the last 3 to 5 years, I've had some personal major challenges in my life, some major relationship issues that kind of blew up in my face, culminating in a point where I was lying simultaneously to people that I genuinely loved and cared about. And the metaphor that I use, that was around the time I discovered Jordan Peterson. A few months in, you hear tell the truth or at least don't lie a couple thousand times, and eventually you start to dig and say, okay, where am I lying to myself and others? Yeah. And the metaphor of that time in my life was that I felt like I was about to open up the gates of hell and step in admitting my untruths. But when I opened up that gate, I realized I was right. It was the gates of hell, but I was already there. And I was taking the first step out of hell in coming completely clean with myself and with others and allowing for that trauma to manifest. And there was a lot of difficulty and you go through, as JP says, you escape slavery and then you got 40 years in the desert. It's not like you escape slavery and then you're the king and you're the top of the pyramid. No, things get worse for a while. You might rather be a slave because they're giving you free food. 40 years in the desert, that sounds pretty rough. So I had my 6 months or 40 years in the desert. And started coming back around, and I went to Jordan Peterson's talk when he came into Phoenix, and that was really, really powerful for me. He didn't say anything live that I didn't get any, from an audio lecture, but I was front row. And so there were several times with the eye contact, and
he always does that. It's like, man,
he locks in. I've learned so much as a public speaker from him, because it just, oof. But beyond that, it was the being in a room with thousands of people who were going through the same kind of things. Yeah. And that archetypally those experiences are the same, even if the details are completely different in all of our lives.
Yep.
So I went through an Overeaters Anonymous 12-step program a few years ago, and it was the same kind of thing of, I thought I was the only one doing these insane, crazy, horrible, shameful things, but actually we're all going through this journey together. And so the last year has been dealing with the I act as if God exists framework, and that was really helpful. And I started, wearing a cross around my neck, and I got my serenity prayer, and I'm going through the actions and acting as if. And I find that the more I act as if, the better my life goes, and the better my relationships are, and the better my career is, and the happier I am, and the more fulfilled I am. And so there's this little bit of fear, because a part of my brain is scoping out where everything goes, and like, okay, if I've act 10% as if and I get 10% results, and I act 50% as if and I get 50% results, looks like I need to just start a church and be a pastor. That seems like the only logical end goal here. So I had my, early 20s, hyper rational, super atheist, all religious people are freaks who believe in an imaginary sky daddy that grants your wishes. But I'd never actually taken the time to have a rational conversation with an intelligent Christian. And I'd never read any good Christians. It's what I see with Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins, who I loved for years. I still love, but I have a much harder time than you listening to the Harris Peterson debates. I literally have to pause the audio in my car and scream at Sam at times for the hypocrisy. But they want to debate these straw men, these hardcore evangelical literalists who are young earth creationists and believe there's a literal manifestation of an anthropomorphic God who listens to your prayers and actually intervenes. They say, well, you believe in a good God, but there's babies with AIDS. So how do you explain that? You go, checkmate, Christians. Like, well, maybe thousands of Christians have been working on that problem for thousands of years. And maybe you should read some Aquinas instead of just listening to the ranting Christian grandma on Facebook, which is what Sam seems to want to debate and what I wanted to debate in my hyper atheist phase. So it got to the point that it's like, the Bible is this collection of stories, and Christianity is this organization for maintaining tradition and myth and insight that was created over thousands of years by millions of humans. And while I think I genuinely know I'm very, very smart, I've tested in very, very high IQ level, member of Mensa, like I'm confident in my intelligence. I'm not so confident that I'm smarter than millions of our ancestors over thousands of years, dedicating their entire lives to solving these problems. So maybe there's something I could learn from the ancestors. And that's the closest I can get to humility at this point in my life. I'm hoping that in my 40s I can shave off a little more of the arrogance. But that's basically
don't worry, it'll go. You'll screw up, or you'll have kids, or something will happen, and we all get taken down. We all get taken down.
Yeah. So I apologize for the soapbox. It
was great. It was great. Wow. Oh, I almost have to catch my breath for you.
I've been told. I'll tell you, I do come out of my shell more the more you get to know me.
Good, because I thought I was wondering how this conversation were going to go, if I was just going to have to carry the whole load.
Yeah.
So, wow. Now, you met with my friend Rod.
I did. Yeah, so we talked about 2.5 hours on the phone, very similar to how this has gone so far. And he was actually very helpful also.
You'll want to meet him in person sometime. I should do a conversation like this with my friend Rod, because...
Oh, I would love to see that, yeah.
Rod, I know no one else in this world like my friend Rodney, and he pastors that church in Tucson. And it's if you're ever in Tucson on a Sunday... They usually meet on like Sunday afternoons. Make sure you get there, because it won't be like any other church service you've probably ever been to. And that's like Rod. He's not like any other person I've ever known. So, but enough about Rod. Okay. Wow. And I just read the email you sent to me, which was also really good and rich and powerful. What do you want to talk about? I mean, you just put a lot in front of us, but where do we start?
So let me give you, there are two quotes that have been bouncing around in my head since I sort of reached out to you that I think might bridge from where my personal journey is into the conversation I opened in the email around the, if there's a biological root for God, and if you need more than, if you can find enough physical evidence to believe and have faith in religion. So one is Heisenberg, the first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you. Which I loved, and I've read a bunch of quotes from other physicists, Feynman, Einstein, whatever, who will say that their spirituality and their faith is a part of their science and a part of their physics, and that there doesn't have to be this. The separation is necessary for a time to train your rational brain to separate out from dogma and tradition and be able to objectively observe what you're seeing in front of you. But eventually, when you go deep enough, you realize there are certain answers science can't give you, and you need that leap of faith to understand where the origin of life, the direction of life, the feeling of meaning and purpose, connection and love between people, all of those sort of ideas, science falls short eventually. And you do find a need for something deeper. And the other one was from, I think it was the last Peterson-Harris debate, and it was actually Douglas Murray toward the end. He said, "A new religion is being created as we speak by a generation of people who think they are non-ideological, who think they are very rational, who think they are past myth, they are past stories, who think they're better than all their ancestors and haven't bothered to even study their ancestors." And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because it was, holy crap, 20-year-old me was so sure he knew everything, and so sure that all of these dead old fuddy-duddies who spent the decades of their lives dedicated to individual problems, the way Peterson has spent decades on just a singular issue and refining it as deep as he can go, and to say, oh, well, I thought about it for half an hour, and I can't imagine he has anything to share that has anything more value than I figured out. And just the profound level of arrogance, because I've always considered myself a little arrogant. In high school, I used to say, it's not arrogance if you actually better than other people. But to have such profound arrogance as an atheist, to say that millions of humans for thousands of years spent their entire lives on the problem of meaning and purpose in the universe, and none of them have anything to offer that's any more valuable than something you thought of in your 30 small years on the planet. So one of the stories that Peterson used in one of the debates that stuck out to me was the sponges. That sponges have a 1-to-1 correlation of perception cell to action cell. The wave, and then you respond with opening or closing, and that as you get more complex, you develop this interpretation layer that has to take what we perceive and give it a meaning so that we can act in the face of that perception.
Well, give it a value. I mean, because that's where his value hierarchy, because it says, you can sift a sponge through a sieve and then it'll come back together. But once your world is more complex and you are more complex, you need a value hierarchy. You need to say, okay, I was coming into my office to get this book, but there's a Bengal tiger. I'll deal with the tiger. That's.
Yeah, no, 100%. There was a scientific study that comes to mind of the jelly experiment, where they'll have 4 or 5 options of jellies at a supermarket, and you offer some samples, and people will try them, and then you offer them to buy, and they'll buy a certain number of jellies, and then you have 40 offerings on, and people love to have the additional choice. They say that they're so happy with the choices, they'll try several of them, but they're much less likely to buy because they're so overwhelmed with options. And I see that so much in my generation. The levels of anxiety and depression and nervous disorders and mental issues are so high, and so many people are just they're told as children, you can do anything you want with your life, and then they go, oh, what am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
There's too many options. You need something at the top. And so looking back through mythology, we have the wide variety of gods, and you can say, oh, well, that's all silly myth. And it's like, well, have you ever had road rage? Like, I've been possessed by the spirit of war before. With our technology challenges, I had a little bit of it earlier today. Like, trying to get the video set up, and like, that's spirit of the god of war will certainly, the gods of jealousy, the god of lust, the god of passions, all of these things will certainly inhabit us. And now we're so enlightened, and we call them personalities and emotions. And sure, but it's something in that interpretive layer of our nervous structure that is assigning a value to our perceptions in order to enable an action. And okay, we know enough to call them psychoses and mental disorders and personalities and whatever nowadays, but for thousands of years, people still experienced that, and they called it a god.
Yep.
I was talking to my partner about this the other day, that so epilepsy, for example, that Sam brought it up as an example in one of the debates,
right.
That they used to think epilepsy was demonic possession, and okay, so there's nothing we can learn from that. Like, well, but people were still having seizures, and doctors and leaders were spending thousands. What do you do when this thing happens? And yeah, they called it possession, sure, but the same thing, a rose by any other name will smell as sweet. The phenomenon was still there, and they were still experimenting organically, trying to figure out, what do we do when this phenomenon happens?
Yep.
And if we lived in a society where everyone believed in God, and you were raised strict religious Christian from birth, and everyone you knew fully believed in the reality of heaven and hell, and the priest, the ordained one who is closest to your Lord and Savior, walks up into your face and tells you, spirit of evil be gone, and sprays the holy water on you that in your mind is literally different than real water. We know that the placebo effect is real. We know that antidepressants are barely as effective as placebos. They're a little bit more effective, but not much. The brain can rewire itself and change its own chemistry with a powerful enough experience. And we're so filled with doubt and lack of faith that it wouldn't have that same effect. But would an exorcism have an effect on a mental illness? Could an exorcism cure schizophrenia in a society where you fully believe that, and your entire surrounding, your family, your parents, your extended family, your community, all believed that you had been exorcised and you were no longer mentally ill and treated you that way? Would that change the wiring of your brain? Possibly. Is it possible? Sure. I mean, is it 100% sure? No. But should we ignore thousands of years? That seems crazy to me now. And it's so weird, because it seemed crazy to do the opposite 5 years ago.
So how smart are we?
No one of us is smarter than all of us. Yeah.
Well, and I've seen that, lately I've been thinking about this too, how it's so funny how different things manifest in different groups. There's, mm-hmm. in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus can't do any miracles in his hometown, and it's like, because they didn't believe. And you'd think,
interesting.
Well, what does that mean? And mm-hmm. and at this point, nobody has really come to terms with that Bible verse mm-hmm. in any kind of contemporary way. Well, even if you buy the entire Christian package, you say, why not? What kind of a thing is this reality? We really don't know much. And so, okay.
And I would say, as a teacher, that that was one of the many labels he gave himself. Yeah. That is 100% true. I spend a lot of time coaching teachers, and that's one of the things I tell them is I got into a big fight once with a middle school teacher because I was saying my students were coming in as freshmen not knowing XYZ content knowledge, and she got very upset and said, "I taught them that." So yeah, no, you taught them, but they didn't learn. I'm not debating whether you taught it. I'm debating whether they learned it, and those are different things.
That's right.
And so he can perform, whether we can put the metaphysical, supernatural, whatever in a box and say that the results. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, the results he was getting were in part due to placebo and belief in the action. That certainly that's a part of it. Darren Brown, the mentalist, these magicians, Chris Angel. A big part of it is that the people in the audience are expecting to be fooled. They go in there, they're buying into what we're doing together. There's not, the whole audience is not full of skeptics searching for every single flaw in the act. Yeah. Those people are there, but it's not the majority of the audience. The crowd is there to listen and hear.
That's right. And one of the things, if you're a teacher or if you're a pastor, you walk into a room, you go, and sometimes, with this church, I often have it because the church building that I'm in is nothing special by any means. But I'll often have it that people will come in and they'll say, I just feel love in this place. And it's like, huh. Or you go into a class. The class, we look at it, well, that class has a culture, and it does, but it's always a little something more than the culture. And people in one group are able to do so, and musicians above anybody know this, because
you
get a group together that syncs, that really plays, and it's like, you can't just pull someone out and put someone in. Well, it might also be good, but it's different. And we have no idea what all is going on with any of this, but it's all true, and we know it.
The ensemble, there's something that is being embodied by everyone as they try to, and it's not just the director, and it's not the composer, and it's not, it's the unity of everyone's vision to one direction.
That's right.
And part of the conductor, the leader's, the pastor's role is to help shape and guide that vision in a certain direction.
That's
but
right.
it's the there's a Peterson speech that was sampled by this music producer I love a lot, Akira the Don, that is, when you're surfing, you don't confuse yourself with the wave. You might be on top of the wave, but you're not the wave.
Yep.
And so the conductor might be riding on top of the wave and bringing the ensemble with them, but the wave is something separate. The spirit of the song, the concept of the music is there. Okay. There's a very interesting conversation debate that happens in classical musical circles sometimes of around, Beethoven's the one that gets used a lot, but like Beethoven's Fifth, was it created and composed, or was it discovered? Because those notes have existed ever since we've had Western harmony. Those notes in that combination existed in the ether, and he was able to document them, but they've always been there. And he was the one who was able to channel it through and bring it out, versus he made it out of his neurons and brain cells.
Right. Right. It's the same question with math. I mean, do you discover math, or do you make math? And then, when it comes to human beings, again, we have this idea that we're somehow contained in our body. I don't think so. I mean, just in terms of having experiences with people, and then freaky. I mean, we've called it ESP. Now people are going to think I'm way over on the wacko edge.
Sure.
But, I often have it that I'm sitting in my office, I'm expecting someone to come, I'm not looking at the clock, and maybe it's an internal, I mean, you can explain it how many different ways, but often I'll know that they're here. And so I'll get up and go to the door. Sometimes I'm wrong, but sometimes it's like, I know they're here. So I get up and I go through the church and I find them at the door. They didn't even knock yet. And you think, well, what is that? And they'll have that with Rupert Sheldrake. He goes into all this stuff. What is with the dogs that get ready? And now, okay, search your evidence, and the amazing Randy can have his $1 million. I don't care, but it's human life is simply weirder than we know.
Yes.
And we are not. We are simply not fully in touch with everything that is going on. That to me is the most obvious thing.
Yeah.
So people like, well, I can't believe that. It's like, oh, okay. Don't believe
and I've been the last 6 months, especially, very hyper attuned to coincidence and synchronicity in my life, and drawing more on that from Jung and from other sources I'm not good at articulating this idea yet. And I've only tried to say it maybe 3 or 4 times with my girlfriend, and we have long conversations about this. And one of the things I love the most about her is she lets me go on my rants and just explore ideas and be wrong for a long time.
If she didn't, you couldn't have that relationship.
Exactly. I've said for a long time that I think 99% of people just absolutely hate me and can't stand my energy and what I do. But the thing is, if it's only 1%, and they're like, oh no, it's definitely more than 1%. No, 1%. There's 7 billion people in the world. That's 70 million people if I have 1%. I'm not so arrogant to need more than 70 million. That seems like enough. I'm okay with that. So she gets me. And I get how rough it can be, but it's for the people that love it, it's exactly, it's like your content and Jordan Peterson's content and these sort of, like, it's not for everyone. It's really not. A lot of people are turned off by it. But for the people that it's for, it's amazing. And there was no outlet for this 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
As Peterson says, if you got 30 seconds on TV, if you're lucky, in 6 minutes, if you're stellar, to explain a difficult, complicated concept. Yeah. And he spent 30 hours going into the first book of the Bible and had millions of people hungry for that content. And no one would have guessed that 15 years ago. You could never get a contract with ABC or CNN or BBC or even History Channel or something to do something like that. They'd say, no, there's no market for it. You'll never do it.
No church would have let him do it.
Exactly.
Even a little, somebody says, oh, I'm a professor of psychology and I want to ramble about the Bible, and don't worry about the rabbit trails. That's part of the show.
Exactly. We'll get back there. We'll circumambulate. but yeah, it's the coincidence thing has been so powerful. The synchronicity thing has been so powerful for me. So the closest I can come to articulating it now, I always try to bring it down into like a physical materialist side, because I know that that's the number one argument against it. And it's the number one argument my brain gives me against it. So the closest I can get to that now is, as you said, the world is more complicated than we know. Quantum physics, string theory, particles having relationships with each other and responding over vast distances, dual slit experiments, all this kind of idea that there are things at the molecular level that we don't understand and don't know, and that the laws of physics break down a bit at that level, and that the cosmos is far more expansive than we can understand, and there are things going on outside of our realm of perception. So all of that is a framework that, when we act in a good way toward meaning and purpose that is in alignment with the world and the universe, and in alignment with ourselves, all the way down to ourselves biologically, up through our body, up through our family, up through our community, our state, our nation, our world, our society, lined up top to bottom, when we are acting in the best possible way, that we might be aware of things that we wouldn't normally notice. So there's a part of the brain called the reticular activating cortex that lights up when things that are relevant to you are spotted in the world. So say you buy a red Ferrari and all of a sudden it seems like everyone's driving red Ferraris. There's a part of your brain responsible for that. But because of how complex the world is, and that 99.9999999% of it is filtered out by our brain, and supposedly with psychedelics we can widen that filter, and possibly meditation and other channels, music and other things as well, can widen that filter, but that filter is so intense that among that 99.99% of things that we're not actively perceiving in our interpretive structure may be one or two things that seem crazily, weirdly coincidental. And that's the Sam Harris rational atheists, hyper-rational people would say, no, these sort of events are happening all the time. And it's just that a nature of the fact that millions of events happen around you, that one or two of them will seem very strange.
It's
you will think of a person
in selection issue.
And you don't remember the times that you thought of a person and they didn't call. Right. And so those things happen, but those things are always there. Right. And so as you line up more with the proper way of living your life to best serve yourself and others in the community, as you get closer to that perhaps your filter starts to lock in on those 1 in a million chances that are always there and that you're always filtering out, but maybe your blinders tilt 3 degrees to the left and you start to see a few more of them. And as you follow those, you get to the sort of hot spot where there's a whole bunch of them. And that's where you're living your best life. That's right. And there's a danger there, because as Sam says, with the moral landscape, you can reach a local maxima where it seems like everything is great. You have to get worse for a while to find the new height. You have to go through your 40 years in the desert to find something new. So you might find a time of trial and going through the underworld where you're not seeing those coincidences and synchronicities and that connection to God, because you're doing some work and you're digging and you're trying to find that new height that you can aspire to. And we say, well, can miracles happen? And it's like, well, we're not proposing that every person in mankind is manifesting miracles constantly.
Right. By definition of the word miracle.
Sure. Those are hard. Yeah,
miracles are by definition unusual, exceptional, out of the ordinary. That's part of the reason people notice them and write them down.
Exactly. And so Peterson would say, there's a hypothesis that 1 or 2 people in all of human history have lined themselves up enough that there were a lot of those things that happened that seem very strange to us. And there's a guy, Wim Hof, who's climbed Mount Everest in shorts. And there are people who run 100-mile marathons multiple days in a row. I've watched videos of Tibetan monks raising their core body temperature on top of the Himalayas to steam water off of wet towels that are on their backs, because they've spent 30 years meditating and are able to make those. I read a case study of a split brain, dissociative personality disorder patient who, when she switched personalities, had one personality that was diabetic and one that wasn't. And her actual blood sugar levels and insulin levels change. Like, we don't understand how weird brains are. They're weird. People are weird. And so I'm not saying that like everybody can learn to walk on water, but maybe over the 20 billion sapiens that have existed over history, whatever the number is, maybe one of them was able to line up enough stuff and have enough control of their mental process that they figured some stuff out that we don't know. And maybe it's not walking on water. Maybe it's not literally turning water into wine. Maybe there's some allegory and metaphor in there too. Maybe it's not the literal resurrection. Maybe it is. That's where, it seems like Peterson and you there's this gray zone in between that I'm but I think it matters. But I think you can with the rational atheist side put that in a box and say, even if it's not literally true, maybe there are things you can do when you are lined up enough with the proper way of being in the world that exceed what you could do otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah, well, to me, there's no question about that. The difficulty I have with the atheists is I don't understand why you would bother being one. I see no upside to it besides just.
Oh, well, and I'll tell you, the upside is arrogant pride. It feels so good to be smug and feel like you know something someone else doesn't, and to degrade someone else's beliefs without even having to research those beliefs.
Well, that's just like religion.
I know.
I see religious people do that all the time. It's like, well, okay, well, there you go. You got it.
It's their religion. It really is. And if it's not that, it's politics. It's a genre of music. It's Marvel movies. It's Disney. It's Sam Harris went into this with my child's God is Batgirl. It's like, yeah, and she's not as good of a God as Jesus is. So maybe give her a better model. Batgirl's a great start. That's cool. She seems pretty nice and truthful and fighting for justice and like, cool, that's great. I'm glad that my generation of kids, as we lost a lot of the religious myths, we had Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, these people to look up to and to deal with difficult moral quandaries. One of the recent Netflix series, Daredevil, you have this huge fight between Daredevil and Punisher, and most people actually sided with Punisher in the reviews and things, saying like, you're locking people up and you're refusing to kill them, but then they're going to get out of jail and kill more people. Like, eventually you need to be willing to stop the bad guys who aren't stopping. And like Batman is responsible for thousands of deaths in Gotham City because he doesn't just finish off Joker. He lets him keep getting out and killing thousands more. And you have to battle with that. Like, is it worth degrading your integrity of the value of human life and the law of not harming others? And is it worth that if it means the deaths of hundreds of children? Because that is what's happening in that world. It's a little mini moral mythology play, right. and it's not just superheroes. I mean, I think Peterson talked about this a little bit in one talk where he says, there are some literal gods in those stories as well. Thor is in those stories, and he is the Norse Thor. He's not. It's not some. There is a slight modern retelling of it, but he basically acts the same way that one did. And you have he runs up against Tony Stark, who's the hyper rational atheist. And then you start fighting with Doctor Strange and saying there's no magic. He's like, well, dude, here's my magic. Boom, there it is in your face. Sorry. Well, I'll figure it out eventually. Maybe you won't. So that's, I think the people like Sam and the part of my brain that is still huge, the rational atheist that fights every single instance of this, it's the throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's yes, there's some awful stuff in there we should get rid of. Sure, there's stuff in there that we should be willing to reassess and figure out if it's the right thing at the time. And you say like, yeah, the Crusades were awful. Like, yeah, sure, they were. That's true. But also every other way of organizing society had things just as horrible. There are zero first world societies that were built on rational atheism with zero violence and no oppression and no, like that doesn't is a, well, but we could design our own system. Okay, but show it to us. Do it.
Well, how about even do it on a small scale? Why don't you just you'd think that this thing they'd tried these little atheist assemblies. You'd think those would be just going gangbusters. I know how hard it is to plant a church, and planting a church seems a lot easier than planting one of those things.
Oh yeah, no, I mean there's meetups. There's meetup.com kind of stuff. There's groups of sometimes even a few hundred people in a society, in a town. But you go to the most atheist, the most anti-religious part of the United States, and you'll still see more people going to church on a Sunday than going to a psychology, atheist, hyper-rational, scientific meetup. It's not as compelling. It's not there. And they can say, oh, well, those meaningful feelings of purpose and connection and spirituality and rainbows coming out of your soul and enlightening you, that all of that is just chemicals and electricity. Sure, but people have that feeling. The talk you've been doing on C.S. Lewis and the abolition of man has been really powerful for me. The idea around, is a waterfall beautiful, or does it just give you feelings of beauty?
Right.
And that, but if 1,000 of us can look at that and we're feeling something inside of us, then there is something in us, in that interpretive middle nervous structure between perception and action. There's something in there, some algorithm, some personality, some emotion, some deity, some monster, some god, whatever label you want to give it. There's a thing, some combination of neurons that have been myelinated over the entirety of your lifetime, plus the history of thousands of your ancestors, that is responding to something about that.
Right.
And it's that it's lined up. You know, the music, that the modern atonal music can be very interesting from an intellectual side, but it's very hard to get that deep spiritual connection to it. Whereas a Bach symphony, a Mozart sonata, a Beethoven symphony, it speaks to something in the human soul because the note is in tune and the phrase is beautiful and the harmony underneath the phrase is beautiful and the balance of the instruments is beautiful and the harmony structure within the movement is beautiful. And the movements placed within the larger structure of the symphony is beautiful, and the acoustics in the hall are beautiful, and the audience's response to it is beautiful, and the conductor's gesture is beautiful, and it's all lining up together from bottom to top. So there's a part in our body that I think, you know, same thing with the waterfall, all these things, that says there's something greater than me, and if I line myself up with the structure of the universe, instead of trying to decide that I'm smarter than reality, that if I act in a way that is lined up with the best possible outcome for myself and for others, that is good. There's something good in acting in a way that's good not only for yourself, but for your past self and your future self and your family and your society.
Yeah. And that's essentially, you know, that's essentially where C.S. Lewis got in terms of C.S. Lewis's journey. I mean, he was raised in the church, you know, like this smart 13-year-old, he gave the whole thing up. He was angry with his father. His father was a mess. His mother died. The schools he went to were horrible. And then, you know, he goes into World War I. And then after World War I, his buddy dies and he promises to take care of his mom. And he's like, I can take care of that woman in some other ways too. And, you know, but then he says later, you know, an atheist has to be careful about the books he reads. Because
that's very true.
What you just described is in a sense the highest part of the pagan world that they figured out. And in the ancient world, what ought a human being to do is well, live in alignment with reality. And you say, well, some people want to change reality, and they're like, well, you go ahead and try and see how that goes for you. You know, just walk off that cliff and say, gravity, nah. You know, see how it goes. And so, you know, the best parts of the ancient world looked at this and said, somehow we need to get ourselves in alignment with this, and that's a good thing to do, and let's call that good.
Yes.
And unlike Dillahunty, well, good and evil there. No. There's good and evil.
Oh, certainly.
It's not arbitrary.
Yeah, if you don't believe in good and evil, then you've just had a really lucky life and you have not yet been exposed to pure malevolence and evil, and most people in the world have. And you talk to a dozen people and ask them if evil's real, you'll hear at least one story that will convince you. Yeah. Because it's when you see it, and it's not common. And I think that's Peterson's really good at that too, of like, most people are trying to do the right thing in their own worldview, And you know, Tony Robbins has a saying that people are doing the best they can with the resources they have. And I think that's true for the vast majority of people. They're trying their best, and they have genuinely good motives at heart for themselves and for others. But there is evil and malevolence in the world, and you can deny it all you want, but you're going to have to build up some big walls to keep it out. And you say that you don't have them, and you say, oh no, we're just going to, you know, it's totally fine. Every total relativism, every belief structure is the same as every other. It's totally fine. There's no differences. Like, okay, but what about people who cannibalize half the infants in their tribe? Is there something wrong with that? Sam will make the argument around child sacrifice and the history with religion, and like, yeah, there's something good to be gained from the concept of being willing to give up something in the present to gain in the future. But it's much better that that's metaphorical than that it's literal. That is good.
Well, the thing I can't figure about Sam is, on one hand, he says, well, child sacrifice, oh, that's evil. On the other hand, well, evil is like the guy who shot up that campus because he had something in the brain. So, and it's like, now, wait a minute. Why did whole populations who were conducting child sacrifice have that abnormality of the brain, and suddenly via ideas, the abnormality went away and not surgery? Or, you know, to me, again, when I listen to his scheme, I think, Yeah, I can understand the fact that you look good and you sound good and you're very articulate.
Sure, yeah.
You sound smooth, but just stop a minute and listen to all of the pieces you're laying down.
Yeah. It's just not deep enough.
No.
It's great at the surface level. It's really wonderful. It's amazing. It's like the most delicious icing on a cake I've ever had. And then underneath it's actual sponge. It's not cake. And it's like, yeah, the icing's wonderful and it looks beautiful and the decorations are great, Sam. I love it. But the Douglas Murray said it toward the end of the debate. He's like, yeah, no, I'd love a society of hyper-rational atheists like Sam who all are driven by reason and motivated by love and trying to manifest a more beautiful world through rationality. Sure, that's fine. That sounds like a great world. The problem is one level below that is literally hell. That you have anybody who just can't quite make that connection to the love is just like, okay, hyper-rational. Sure, in the pursuit of my self-interest. No, okay, that's too bad. No. So maybe it's nice to have an overarching mythological structure that keeps us aligned to something better than that, rather than having to actually document out step by step the hyper-rational beliefs to get you there. Santa, I used to, as a child, when maybe as a teenager, when I was past Santa, I literally remember making this decision that I would never lie to my child about Santa. That seems like such a cruel thing to do to a child. Why would you lie to them constantly for years and years? But as an adult, I can now look back and say, maybe there's something useful to saying there's someone watching and he knows if you're being good or bad. And you will get rewarded if you're good, and you will not get rewarded if you're bad. Now, Santa doesn't actually punish you if you're bad. He doesn't send you to hell. He doesn't poke you with a stick. He just leaves you some cold. He doesn't do good things for you, which I think is actually a very good metaphor for Peterson's conceptualization of logos, Jesus, God, whatever labels you want to put on it, is that it's not that he's punishing you. And then there's many religious speakers who would say this too, that it's like hell is absence from God, that it is lack of being in God's presence, that you have turned away from God and you are not feeling his light, not that he is deliberately punishing you. Yep. It's the same thing as teaching, that you say, you earned this grade. I didn't fail you. You performed certain actions and have earned this grade as a result of that. Yeah. So so that if you think of Santa as the big Santa, and then you've got that he has a wonderful bounty of rewards to bless you with if you do the right things, and if you don't, you're just not going to have those rewards. You go, okay, so I'll have a kind of boring, not so nice life because I want to have all those rewards. No, the world is suffering and awfulness and evil and malevolence, and nature's constantly trying to kill you and destroy you every second of the day. And literally every beast of the field wants to devour your corpse. And so, yeah, if you don't have his blessings, stuff doesn't look that good. Just 100 years ago, we had a really rough time just surviving. It was hard. And now we have, it takes us 20 minutes to get a connection set up. But man, I'm talking to you from a different state. And I can see your face and we can laugh and we can joke and we can talk. And I've taught people how to sing from halfway across the world over an internet connection. That's amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. And if it only worked 1/10 of the time, it's a miracle. Yeah, it's insane. And if you showed this to the King of France in 1682, he would have said you were a wizard or a magician or a prophet of God. It's insane. And like everything we have is like show a lighter to someone before, when they had to wait for lightning to strike and then grab a tree that happened to spark and hope that it would stay on fire and try to maintain it. Yep. It's insane.
And yet many psychologists are saying, all this miraculous stuff we're doing is making us more depressed and more anxious.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, did you really want more power? Well, tell me about now you're obviously a very smart guy.
Thank you.
Why music? How did you get into music? Because, listening to your talk, you think, well, you could, I dare bet you could probably make more money doing something other than you're doing now. That's just a hunch I've got.
Well, and I'd say that many of my friends have, like friends of mine who are of similar level of intellect and curiosity and passion and talent, have gone into, computer programming was definitely an appealing field. I taught AP calculus while I was in high school, and everyone I taught got a perfect score on the test. I thought about being a math teacher. I was going to be a lawyer for years. I thought about going into computers. I thought about going into psychology. I had a lot of different options. And realistically what it was two factors. And half of the decision was I was dating a girl at the time who was majoring in music education. It was my first girlfriend and I didn't want to lose her. So it'd be unethical not to give that caveat. but the narrative that I tell myself about my past.
The limbic system. That's always back there.
Exactly.
I don't care how big your frontal cortex is. That limbic system is back there. Exactly. That frontal cortex. You're my bitch. You really are.
Exactly. So the narrative I tell myself is that I didn't have very good self-discipline my entire life because I could always just throw energy and IQ at any problem and solve it. I've several times had to write a 56-page research paper 3 hours before it's due and just no problem. I can pump it out, no problem. And I'm at the point in my life now that I'm running up against that and I'm hitting the limits there. But music was something that I genuinely loved. I'd always sung since I was a small child. I really enjoyed it, but I wasn't very good at it. And I had to work hard to get better. And I couldn't just be smart enough to sound good when I sang. No matter how much you know about singing intellectually, the physical coordination doesn't happen until you do the hours. So an analogy I use all the time is I could give you a 3,000-page book on how to ride a bike and show you every YouTube lecture on how to ride a bike and give you a coach on how to ride a bike. But the first time you get on a bike, you're going to fall off the bike because the balancing on the bike is not a knowledge problem. It's an embodiment problem.
That's right.
And it's a discipline problem. And that's music was the thing. Like, okay, I'm going to have to work hard at this to be any good. And I can use my pathological drive for ambition and success and superiority over others in this field to teach myself how to be disciplined, because there's no way for me to succeed at this just by being smart. I'm going to have to actually work. And math, I could have done that. And another part of it was also the moral side. I worried being a lawyer that with my success, ambition, drive, that eventually I'd get to the point that the only way I could prove how good I was at it was to take cases I knew were guilty and prove that they were innocent. Because you could say you're the best lawyer in the world, but if you're only getting off innocent clients, that's easy mode.
So if you're a lawyer too.
Hussein
so you're not just a musician, you're also a lawyer.
No. I was going to be a lawyer.
Oh, okay.
So so that was the decision of not going into that field, was in part because I feared that, like I was saying with the God conversation, that my brain, when I open a door, looks at where that door's going. And so it's like, okay, I could be a great lawyer for 5, 10, 15 years, but eventually,
a lot of rich people off. Well, there you go.
Exactly. And I don't think I could be a good father and a good moral model for my children and do that at the same time. And that's, I think, how good I get at music and teaching, I'm going to be a good parent. You know, it's like, you can't be such a good music teacher that it makes you a bad dad. But now it seems like I got to be a pastor. So I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, you're certainly channeling a lot of, certainly nobody contemporary if you think pastors are at the top of any pyramid, because right now pastors are, they're a little bit above politicians, but they're certainly lower than doctors, and doctors have come down a few notches.
That's also true.
I don't know who's at the top anymore, but
it's hard to tell. Well, and I think that's a part of it too, is that beyond the nihilism and the loss of connection to spirituality and the loss of connection to myth and all of that, which is a huge conversation. But if you put that in a box, there's still that the dominance hierarchies are in constant flux and reconstruction now in a way that they weren't in the past. There was at least stability from decade to decade. If not from century to century. But now there's barely stability from year to year, let alone from a 6 month to 6 month period. I mean, you look at what's happening with the intellectual dark web and podcasting and this sort of, like, those jobs didn't exist 10 years ago. That was not a thing. You couldn't do that. And now you can. And it's amazing that, like, those things might disappear in 2 years, and then a new thing might pop up in its stead. So it's very hard to know how to act now to have success later. In the way that I think that we built education in a way that was very useful for a long time. My mom worked for the same company for 50 something years, retired from them with a great pension, great benefits. They took care of her, and that was her framework. And her father, ran a company himself. He had a restaurant and car sales, and her mother worked as a waitress her entire life. Same kind of, you have 2 or 3 jobs, and then you find your lifetime job. And they taught us, that generation taught us that way. Saying, find the right place and find the company that'll take care of you in the field that you want, and then stay there forever. And those things exist. I mean, there are pastors that find their lifetime church, and there are teachers that find their lifetime school, and there are doctors that find their lifetime hospital. But the average person in my generation is going through 7 career fields over the span of their career, not jobs, career fields. cults. Like that's insane. And we can't prepare for that with concrete skills and knowledge. You can only prepare for that with principles and values and tactics and strategy, not on the ground actions specifically laid out by people who are using thinking that will not be relevant by the time the world that you're going to live in has manifested itself.
Yep.
I fear that we spend most of our time focusing for ourselves, but also teaching our young what to think instead of how to think. And it's the same thing, I think, that's driving a lot of people away from the modern church, is that they're teaching you what to believe instead of how to find belief and how to believe and how to live in the world. Because I really think that this is one of the reasons I was talking to a friend. I have a good friend who's obsessed with cults, and she was saying like some people actually could really use a cult. Because one of the ways a lot of those cults build up their membership is they go find people who are on the street, homeless, drug addicted, and get them cleaned up and get them on a path in life. And then they insert all their ideology on top of that. And that's pathological and that's horrible. But would you rather be a homeless, drug addict, atheist who's living a horrible life, or someone who's cleaned up and has a job and has a wife and has kids and believes in weird aliens that come down and scan your brain? Like, yeah, that's a weird thing, and it's like, oh, but they're giving 50% of their income. Yeah, but their income's 5 times bigger because they're off drugs now. So maybe it's useful for some people. And I think that we lose sight of the fact that having a community and a value structure and a way of living your life and a higher good to align yourself to can transform your life, as opposed to just here are things that actually happened that are true. This miracle occurred, this thing happened, this person said this, and this book was written by this deity, and that means X, Y, Z. But I think if you can show people the results in their life first, and then the ideology comes on top of that, it's much easier to accept because they've seen it manifest in their world. And it's so hard because we had tradition to help with that bridge, that buy-in for so long. If you were raised by your parents for 30 years to believe in that structure, then it's not that hard to take the leap. But if you have none of that, it's so like constructing this from scratch is incredibly difficult for me. And I hear Sam acting like it's an easy thing that everyone could do. And theoretically everyone could do it, but who has the time? Who has the energy? Who has the mental capacity to just listen to the amount of audio and read the number of books? And like, I still haven't gotten through the Bible. I've gotten through 10,000 hours of Peterson talking about it, and 500 hours
out of Genesis.
Yeah, like I got through the where they're listing everybody's dads and great granddads and great great granddads, and I'm like, okay, this is hard to get through, man. It doesn't really open with a bang. There's a bit of a rough first chapter there. So that actually would be something that'd be very useful. Is if you would have any recommendations, given all we've talked about, of entry points into the Bible. Like where would you recommend someone at my position start trying to understand this? Do you just start from the beginning and go cover to cover, or do you start with some parables? Do you
see that's always people often ask me this question. It's a difficult question to answer because it very much depends on the individual, their motivation, because the Bible is, although I talked to someone recently who was a pastor, and he said, I read the whole Bible through in a month, and I thought, ooh, there's something.
Yep.
Part of the difficulty of the Bible is that part of the amazing thing about the Bible is that we can actually understand any of it at all. Mm-hmm. Because, I remember going to college and trying to read Shakespeare, and it's like,
oh yeah, or Beowulf, or
yes, and that's not anywhere near as old as the Bible.
Yep.
And so I think I'll give you a few things. Well, for one thing, the Bible books are actually books. Mm-hmm. And so you're better off reading the Bible in large sections than tiny little sections. Generally speaking, if you want to understand what's in the content, it's really helpful to look for, here are 2 books. Now, another difficulty about the Bible is that everyone who's going to help you with the Bible can't help but help you from their perspective.
Yes.
And so that's, you got all these books. Yep. Every one of them is written by someone with a perspective. And
there's no objective truth that's going to come out to save the day.
That's right. And so here's 2 little books They've been around a while. You can get them probably for nothing used. How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, which and it's by a couple of middle of the road Bible scholars, an Old Testament scholar, Douglas Stewart, and a New Testament scholar, Gordon Fee. And then another book by both of them, How to Read the Bible book. Well, it's the same book. It's
different edition.
It's a different edition. But it's How to Read the Bible book by book. I think I've got that book over there. And basically what it does is gives you a little bit of summary, just a little bit of orientation to the book, because one of the difficult things in many of the books, all of those books have their own histories. And it's not always known what their histories are. So scholars do a lot of work on that. You know, another excellent resource that I often point people to is the Bible Project on YouTube. And they have their own podcast. And again, these guys are some terrific scholars, but they also pitch things at a non-technical way.
That's great.
At the same time, another really good guy to read, he's a Jewish scholar, Robert Alter. Is one of his most important early books, The Art of Biblical Narrative. Because it used to be, you know, even 150 years ago, people would read the Bible and say, well, these people really don't know what they're doing. The whole thing's a mess. And what Robert Alter was able to do is say, no, they were really just from a different culture. And if you want to understand how they're talking, learn how they framed things.
Sure.
And so actually, and this is part of my criticism of Peterson and his and how he approaches the Bible. He's picking up stuff on the internet, which all tends to be public domain stuff. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of really good biblical scholarship done in the last 50 years where they began to recognize the literary nature of the Bible. And in the last 50, 100 years, they have opened up worlds of information via archaeology that they never had before that really helps us contextualize the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so, but the difficulty is that, you know, when I first started listening to Peterson, it's like, yeah, you're going to go through the Bible. Right. You know, because it's,
yeah.
And this is just
shelves of books for one. Yeah. I mean, he says that frequently, that, you know, you could spend 12 years reading Cain and Abel, and it's 10 lines. And
everything that's been written about it.
Yep.
I mean, it is absolutely insane. At the same time, there is no, I would also recommend, well, let me ask you this question. What translation of the Bible do you use?
That's been one of the
big Greek and Hebrew. If you knew Greek and Hebrew, that would help.
Well, again, you know, this is you open up the door and then I see sort of where the path goes. It's like, hey, if I'm going to read the Bible, I got to learn Hebrew and Greek and just go back to source material. Like, I'm not going to read somebody else's interpretation of the words. I want to see the words for myself. And so that you know, it's like, okay, if I'm going to commit to reading one book of the Bible, I'm committing to learning Hebrew and going back to the ancient, you know, the oldest translation I could find. And that, So yeah, that's the hard thing is finding one. And I think that what I've heard from several people, and Rod echoed this too, just like pick one and go with it for a while until you find something that does, and then you'll know more as you start going through, and you'll see what you like and what you don't like, and you'll have more information to assess in the future. And maybe you finish reading one book and you didn't really like that translation and you want to find something else, or maybe you really did like it. You know, maybe find something that a church near you also uses, so you have someone to talk to about it. Yeah. That might be useful. Community is kind of a part of it.
It's a big part of it. And like you said, I mean, often people will be like, well, they're a biblical scholar. Well, an engine mechanic and an expert driver, just like you said with a bicycle, they understand the car in different ways.
Yep.
And so you can have a really mature, wise Christian who knows how to live the Christian life, who gets the Bible tremendously wrong.
Yep.
And you think, well, that shouldn't be. No, but that's kind of the way life is.
Totally. We believe things that we don't think we believe, and we don't believe things that we do think we believe. Right. Those I think Peterson, this is around the, like, let's get all cognitive science in here, you know, part of the debate where he's like, you know, Sam Sam said something like, after all these debates, I still don't understand what this God is that you talk about. He goes, well, neither do you. None of us do. We don't. It's not like your thoughts are transparent to you. We don't understand how our brains work. You think you want one thing, and then you meet somebody, and you're like, why am I attracted to this person? I don't like anything about them, but my heart and my soul are telling me to be with them. Like, well, you don't understand you, and none of us do. And all of us together have this hallucinogenic psychedelic dream of meaning and purpose and mythology and spirit that collectively tries to move toward that direction, and you want to throw all that away in favor of your one isolated independent little thought process, which not, I mean, even if you're 45, 50, and you're in a more stable place in life than I am and have spent a lot more time thinking about it, it's not like you spent your whole life thinking about it. Maybe from 18, maybe. Peterson's got a good 40, 50 years of really careful thought on these concepts, but that's not a lot in the span of history. It's not much at all.
No. And it's all particular and filtered through, and no, that's right.
There's no way you could read all of the material you need to read to have enough depth.
No, can't do it.
It's all built up.
Yep. And so again, one key also is, so people wonder about church. I don't need a church, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Here's, one of the things I do with my adult Sunday school class, which, there's 6 to 10 people in there in any given week. It's not like I'm wildly successful or anything, but when I'm studying the Bible with them, I often go at different speeds. Sometimes I'll go through a lot quickly. It all depends. But like with biblical translations, often I'll have like a really wooden translation in one column, and then kind of a moderate translation like the ESV or the NIV in another column, and then like a paraphrase in the third column. And that then, once you kind of get the sense of what all the translators are doing, it kind of helps you give a feel for that. But part of this thing is figuring out pacing, because again, we are much more shaped by our habits than we are by our aspirations. And so just like in terms of learning music, I mean, some say, well, I want to be a great pianist. Great. You know what you're gonna have to do? You're gonna have to practice. And if you're actually going to do this, succeed over a long period of time, it can't be all glandular aspiration. You basically say, this is how much I'm going to practice, and I'm going to stick to it. And it's the cumulative effect over years. And another thing that one of the things I was thinking yesterday about doing a video about learning, because I'm now going back through, again, some of my colleagues would think I'm nuts for how much time I've spent on Jordan Peterson, but sure. I'm now going back through Maps of Meaning 2017, that class. Yep. I listened to those about a year ago. Now, all the talking and studying I've done on Jordan Peterson since then, now going back over this, it's like a completely new course for me. It is.
Yeah, new things stick out to you.
That's right. Yeah. And I understand it at a whole different level. And, part of this is, part of the reason I've always pitched what I'm doing on YouTube as this is all first draft, because, by now, in some ways, I'm embarrassed about the work I did 6, 8, 10 months ago. I've just learned
You're not doing good work if you're not. I mean, it's the same thing as a musician. If you go back to a concert from 6 months, 2 years, like you might be really proud of what you accomplished with that group or with that, for what your skills were at that time.
That's right.
But if you were to redo that concert now, you'd want it to be better. You would expect it to be better. I actually have a really hard time watching my tapes. Right. I don't know if you have this problem as well. Because you don't seem to do a ton of editing on your videos.
I do zero editing.
Yeah. So it's hard to watch back immediately after a recording of yourself, because you can't give yourself the benefit of that. Like if I watch a video of me from 2 months ago, I can say, oh yeah, that was super dumb 2 months ago me who didn't know anything. If I was doing that today, I'd do so much better. If I watch this, in an hour from now, I'm going to say, wow, why is that guy so inarticulate? He just stumbles over himself. He's constantly stuttering. What's this guy doing? He's not even clearly getting his message across. I would do that message so much better than that idiot. That's what I'll think when I watch this in a month and a half, and hello, month and a half, future me. That's nice.
That's right.
But like if I did it in an hour, I would just I can't deal with that emotional trauma.
Right.
So certainly that's a part of it is the accepting that we're going to get better, and that everything in the past is past, and it was good for what it was, and it's a big really hard part about living in 2018. It's actually something I think about a lot with I coach a lot of young people, and I've had many of my clients say, because I do private tutoring and I do private music lessons. They'll say, oh, so you're a life coach who pretends that you're a private coach because life coaching is too woo-woo for you. But like, even if my kid wasn't getting better grades and wasn't sounding better on their music, which they are, but even if they weren't, they're happier and better people as a result of working with you.
Sure.
They've started picking up their rooms more. They're more polite and respectful to me. They do their homework more often. Like, they're sorting through their stuff. That's you're trying to get that encouragement element, that training, that coaching, that mentoring aspect in there too. And that's so important. But I see that with the videos, with the documentation, podcasting, all this sort of stuff, that it's very hard as a young person now to escape your past. Yeah. And it used to be, you go to high school and you could transform yourself and, you were the preppy kid, but now you can be the goth kid. And then you go to college and you're like, oh, screw being the goth kid, I'm going to be the sporty kid. And then you get out of college and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this instead. But now all of that follows you for your entire life. So, because I worry about that. I look at Facebook has this feature where it'll show you what you did on this day 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And I look at these memories. I'm like, God, what was that idiot thinking 6 years ago? I put that out in public for everyone to see. And I thought it made me look good. I thought it made me smart. And not like an arrogant D-bag. Like, come on, obviously. Anybody looking at this with any kind of intelligence would see what a stupid thing to put in public. So I delete all of those so I don't have to worry about them anymore.
Right. My kids hated the fact that I wouldn't let them get a tattoo when you can't get a tattoo before 18 without my permission. I said, no tattoos. They're like, come on, Dad. I'm like, you'll thank me someday. Trust me. It's little 16-year-old that tattoo that you thought was really cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny. That's actually a very good specific example, because that was one of the things that made me realize how much I needed to deal with my spirituality and faith. Is that I have many friends who gotten tattoos, and they say, oh, would you ever get a tattoo about something? And I said, I can't think of anything I believe in strong enough to want to mark my body with it for life. And that made me pause, because I'm like, why don't I have anything in my life that I feel strong enough about that I'm okay with putting a mark somewhere on my shoulder that no one will ever see? That seems like, it was like, oh, well, I can't commit to that, because then in 10 years, what if I don't feel that way anymore? It's like, well, but what is going to carry through for me? And so I got to the last 5-6 years where I would say, like, well, the thing I could imagine tattooing on myself, and I don't think I will get a tattoo, but the thing I could imagine doing is my wife's name, my children. Those are things I could see. And that Peterson talks about that all the time of, you sort yourself out, and then maybe you can help your family. And then maybe if you're really if you're really amazing, you can help the rest of your town. And maybe you can help your state, and maybe you can help your country, but probably not. Most people can't. If you can help your family a little bit, that's awesome. That's as far as you get. That's great. And that the church is the larger body that captures all those people trying to help their family and their collective family, and that through helping your family, you can help the families of others, and you help your family learn how to be better people by helping them help other people, and you build up this network of people that love each other and support each other, and that's all. I can see a path there where a tattoo might feel justified, and that it's so fun. It seems like such a petty thing, but it's like, well, I could never mark my body with something permanent, because what if I was embarrassed by it in the future? So we'll just do something that's not going to be embarrassing, something that that you'll still believe in 10 years. I don't have any of those things. Well, maybe you should ask yourself why you don't have any of those things. Do you believe genocide is wrong? Maybe I could get a tattoo that says genocide is wrong. Would that be okay? Well, I don't know. In 15 years, maybe, you could make an argument. No, there's some things that are true.
Well, and what's amazing, you're talking about music, and that brings up, of course, Gaius and Titius and the Absolutes of Man, where they're not teaching them English. Now, Gaius and Titius are trying to communicate something to the people that Gaius and Titius imagine is important. But what's amazing often that you realize is that, so, you've coming at it with music, and I'm coming at it with, Christian church stuff, and it's your football coach, or it's your English teacher. And there's something there that is accessible through various, it's not, it's got to be this and it's got to be that. No, but there's something there that we're approaching from all these different sides that is really there. And then, like you said earlier, somehow you start to get sorted out, and this then has a solidity. And again, we have to grab at metaphors, because it's the only thing we have.
The only thing.
A solidity and a cohesion that is realer than what? Realer than me right now in this moment, and the stuff. I mean, how can what the language in a book points to be more real than this paper thing I'm holding? I mean, that's really what we're dealing with the Sam Harris stuff. That
Sure.
What is that reality? And in fact, it's such a reality that we will, and again, this is what Lewis gets at in The Abolition of Man. It's such a reality that even the lower forms of it, we will give our life for. Nationalism. And you think, okay, they're giving their life for their country. Well, maybe you think about, all these Russian soldiers in World War II who, a lot of them didn't do it willingly because, they had guns at their backs. You turn around, I'm going to. They didn't have a choice. But people who gave their lives even for unworthy causes, even then we can stop and say, well, there's something there. There's something there that is, we don't know what it is. We have a hard time articulating it, but.
Yeah, language isn't enough. There's no. I have a book recommendation for you. It's funny. It came up with a guy who I met through sort of the Jordan Peterson meaning space, and we were talking for a while, and he was having a problem with community and such. And I said, oh, you should look for a Jordan Peterson meetup in your area. Where do you live? And he told me where he lived. And I said, oh, actually, I'm flying there next week. We should get together and get some coffee. One of those little synchronicity moments that just like telling me it was the right thing. And we got together for a meal, hung out for 5.5 hours talking about all this stuff. And one that I brought up was this book, Musashi, the Book of Five Rings.
Oh, I don't know. How do you spell it?
Musashi is the author, Musashi, and it's called the Book of Five Rings.
The Book of Five Rings?
Five Rings, yes. And but what was great is I started talking to him about it, and he goes, oh, I'll have to read it. I go, no, see, I haven't even read it. I just know the one sentence summary, and it changed my life. Is that the one sentence summary is, when you see the way in one thing, you see the way in all things.
Huh.
And it's a story from a samurai about learning the art of the sword and the art of combat but learning how to live a good life and be a good citizen and a good father and a good member of society through the art of the sword. Yeah. And that really transformed things for me, because I realized the reason why I love music is not for music's sake. Yeah. A lot of people, almost all the musicians I know, they love what music makes them feel when they sing, when they perform, when they express themselves. They love the music for the music's sake. Yeah. And I do enjoy music, but what I say is, like, for me, music is very much like tennis. It's a hobby, it's fun, and like for some people, tennis is the most amazing thing in the world too. It's just like, but you have your things, and like hiking is more enjoyable than going for a run, or swimming at the beach is more enjoyable than volleyball. And you got your little hierarchy, and like music is not the top of my hierarchy. Obviously, talking on soapboxes about how smart I am is the top of my hierarchy. So anyway, but that music is a great vehicle, especially singing. Singing is so powerful as a vehicle for making people confront their self-limitation and finding community with each other. Because you're familiar with the general idea that people are more afraid of public speaking than of death. Yeah. But if you offer them the chance of, okay, public speaking for 5 minutes or singing a song for 2 minutes in front of a crowd, like, what are you going to choose? And I've done this. I've had elementary choir concerts. So I have my little elementary choir on stage. And I turn out to the audience and say, parents, how many of you would trade places with your child right now and sing with me up on stage? And you have a few, stage moms who are happy to do. The vast majority don't raise their hand. Yeah. I say, okay, if I offered you $200 right now, how many of you would come up on stage and sing with me? And you get a couple of hands and say, okay, $2,000. $20,000. There's still hands that aren't up. $20,000, like, too scared to sing. Singing is risky. It's vulnerable. It's terrifying. It's really, really, and so it forces up all that vulnerability and fear from people, and it makes you lay it all out on the table. Because even if you love it, and even if you're really good at it, you're still constantly terrified you're going to mess up and embarrass yourself. Yeah. The best singers in the world are horrified of vocal cracks and breaks on stage, and it happens. I mean, Idina Menzel had a horrible one with "Let It Go" a little while ago in a public performance, and she was outside. It was cold. She sung the song 10,000 times, and one time it didn't sound good on one note. Not all the song. It was the last little high note crack, but everyone judged her for it nonstop. And same thing with Mariah Carey, same thing with all these famous singers. They have these little moments and you judge them. But it's such a good vehicle for that, because you get that on the solo end. But then when you add in the group singing element, you can't have any ego, any arrogance, any competition, any judgment of others. As soon as that inserts itself into the room, the cohesion of the choir just breaks apart. you don't have that unity anymore. You're not lined up from top to bottom. So you have to be a good singer, and you have to be singing a good note with good breath and good posture, with a good tone in that note, in that phrase, in that song, in that concert, with the people next to you in your section and in the entire ensemble, and line it up with the pianist, and line it up with the conductor, and line it up with the acoustics of the space and the architecture, and with the audience, and with the recording technology, because everything's amplified these days. So you're getting the technology in there too. It's all has to be lined up top to bottom, and any gap in that sticks out. And what I love saying to my choirs, because they'll say, does this, we'll get on some nitpicky thing on a little vowel. We'll say, for unto us a child is born, instead of for unto us a child is born. That for kind of American R vowel is gross and disgusting. People hate it. It's awful. And they say, well, is the audience going to notice the difference between an vowel and an vowel? No, they're not going to articulate that to you, but they'll know they didn't like the sound as much, and it pulls them out of the moment, and they're not lost in the rapture of the art and the beauty. They're analyzing, oh, I didn't like that. And when they have a little, oh, I didn't like that moment 4 or 5 times throughout a song, they don't get enough time to let themselves go into the experience. And so I really do genuinely believe you could have that with any of a multitude of things. With you see that in the IDW guys. A lot of them do BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they get like almost a spiritual connection through their martial art. And you can have that. You can have it through church. You can have it through group book studies. You can have it through soccer. You can have it through math. But group singing is a great vehicle for it that I feel connection to, that pretty much no one shows up to unless they want to do it. There's very few people who are in a choir because they have to be there. And it's a great way of, everybody can do it. Whereas soccer, basketball, any of these other things, some of them require a very high level of intellectual skill. If you're talking about, book studies and philosophy, there's some people who just cannot read to the level they would need to be able to get that experience from Nietzsche. And there are people who are physically limited in a way that they wouldn't be able to get it from football, from baseball, from yoga, from whatever, or from martial arts or something like that. And there are people who are time limited in a way they wouldn't be able to do it from something that's more time demanding. And there are people who are financially limited to the way they couldn't do it with an instrument because they can't afford to buy an instrument. But everyone has this. And there's some people with some massive damage, and that's really tragic and really sad. And I've had people with smoking damage, but the vast majority of people, even in a wheelchair, I've had singers who passed on for me. I have a retirement community choir with singers all the way up in the late 90s. And I've had singers who've had to come to me and say, hey, I can only do half this concert because my lungs are just not working, and I can't get enough air capacity to make it through this whole thing. And people who need to sit for the entire concert because they can't have enough leg strength to stand themselves up for an hour, but they can still sing. They can contribute, and what's even more beautiful than that is that many of the songs, especially if you're doing a Christmas concert or folk songs or Broadway even or Disney, these songs go back to their childhood. And so it's not just this song that you're singing for me. It's this song that I have sung every year for 70 years of my life. And to hear someone at that part of their life sing Silent Night while holding hands with a bunch of other people, and their daughter is in the audience and their granddaughter's in the audience, and they're all standing and singing together and tears down their eyes, like that is powerful. And it has meaning. And you could say that it's not religious and it's not spiritual, sure, but there's something going on inside these people, and it's real. Sam got into this with Peterson, because he would say, Peterson would say, well, you can't account for love because love's not a fact. No, it's a fact that people feel love and that love is a good feeling. Like, okay, if we're going to play that game, that's a great game. It's a fact that people have religious experiences and it brings meaning to their life and they're happier. And you said that happiness and well-being are your most important values. So stop crapping on religion all the time, because for a lot of people, it's the main source of their happiness and fulfillment in life. And who cares if it's not real? Yes, that matters. That's a conversation to have, sure. But you shouldn't just throw the whole thing out when it is providing so much value and meaning to so many people. And so singing is one of those great things that can just bridge that secular sacred divide. Peterson says that all the time, that the music is something you can't deny. You've removed meaning from almost everything, and you have these punk rock atheist, nihilist, absolute rationalist, Christian hating, religion hating, dogma hating, nihilist atheists who believe in nothing, but they still listen to their punk rock nihilist atheist music and have little tingles down their spine when they do it, and they don't have an explanation for that. There's almost no one who gets no emotional feeling from any music anywhere. And if they did, I would challenge them and say, okay, let's imagine we live in a universe where I have a recording of your mother singing the lullaby she used to sing to you when she put you to bed and kiss you on the forehead at night. Do you think you're not going to have a feeling when you hear that sound? Because I can't necessarily reproduce it if your mom's passed away. I'm sorry, but there's feeling there. There's emotion.
And is it only a feeling? And is it merely a feeling?
Yeah, or is there something more?
I think of Isaiah goes to the temple, and God shows up literally, and the cherubim say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty," which means God is he is holy, holy, holy. You'd say it 3 times in Hebrew. Basically, it's the superlative. He's the most unlike anything you can possibly imagine. So the top, and then the next phrase is, the whole earth is full of his glory, which means you can be Sam Harris denying the heck out of him, and suddenly, you're smitten by the sight of your daughter. And basically C.S. Lewis has a great line in one of his books, praise is inner health made audible. And so there it is. You're exactly right. You can deny God all you want, and he's still giving you these gifts that you cannot account for. And the true tragedy of your life then is you have no one to thank, which in a sense makes you functionally ungrateful. When in fact gratitude is really what makes our hearts sing.
100%. And you can't. There are very few things that will push negative emotion out of yourself than finding something to be grateful for.
That's right.
It's what we're, with the technology thing. It's what I was saying. We can get frustrated that we lose 20 minutes trying to fix the technology, or we can say, there was a comedian who had a bit about it that, it took 3 minutes for that message I sent to get to you. It's like, it's going to space. Can you give it a minute to go to space and bounce back to the other end of the world? 100 years ago, you had to pay a dude on a horse to ride for 4 days to get your letter to someone. And you could just send your little funny picture of a cat to your grandma on the other side of the planet, bouncing off of things that we launched into space. We dug metal out of the ground and melted it down and built it into a giant device and exploded liquid dinosaurs from millions of years ago to get it up into orbit, and it flies around the planet constantly and bounce your picture of a cat to your grandma. And if it took 2 months, it's amazing. It's a miracle. And nobody cares. We're so profoundly ungrateful for everything. It's just, it's amazing to me because I'm still, I'm as much of an offender as anyone else. And it just, there at least once or twice a day where I pause and go, the thing that I am so mad about right now would have been a goddamn miracle in 1850. Just the fact that this guy, I'm behind a guy in traffic and the light turned green and it's been 3 seconds. I'm like, I'm going to be a nice, peaceful person. I'm sure he's just distracted. I'll give him a few seconds in order to get on his way. It's been 10 seconds, man. Come on, let's go. It's like, hey, if it took you an extra 10 seconds to get 50 miles across town 100 years ago, that would be a miracle. It's amazing, and no one cares. And it's so insane to me because if you just took anything from modern day, you take the books on your wall, take any random book from that wall and go back to someone in 1200.
You couldn't make this, this silly plastic lobster.
Hundreds, if not thousands of humans from around the world had to collaborate to make that silly plastic lobster.
That's right.
They had to refine the oils into plastics. They had to figure out the technology. The person who had to invent the technology to pump in the air into that, the person who devised the entire pump that you use, even if you just blow it in with your mouth, that mechanism inside it that allows the air to go in without coming out simultaneously, that's an incredible invention. And to create all that and then to design the lobster from there, like that was a great work of art. There are plenty of artists who can't replicate what that person did with that. It's 3 dimensions. That's amazing. It's sculpture in manifest inside the mind that then comes out. It's amazing, and no one cares. And that's the thing that comes back for me is that as you're saying with the radical atheists, and I feel bad because I feel like we use Sam as this figurehead for that when really, and he's just the most visible of them nowadays.
He's a stand-in for
exactly.
For the idea.
We're talking about the spirit of rational atheism, which Peterson might call Lucifer, and I feel bad about putting Sam in that role. But we're more talking about the archetypal, metaphorical spirit of hyper-rational atheism that doesn't see any value in belief in mythology and religion. For lack of a better term, we'll call that Sam Harris. But you need labels for things. You really do. Because it's hard to, if you listen to Peterson, he can spend 3 hours saying a thing that you could just wrap up with God is good. It's like, but you got to spend 3 hours telling me what you mean by God and what you mean by is and what you mean by good. Those are 3 very important words. And it's what I said in my email to you, is God real? Okay, what do you mean by is? What do you mean by God? What do you mean by real? Let's spend 5.5 hours talking about that. I once, with a girl I was dating, I wrote her a 5-page love letter musing on the phrase, I love you. And said, okay, if I'm going to have this discussion, I need to define for you what I mean by I, who is the person that loves you. What do I mean by love? What does love mean between 2 human spirits and souls? And what does you mean? What is the definition of you that I am using in my mind that is clearly not who you actually are? I've created this amazing thing on a pedestal. And so let me lay that out for you so you can see what I mean when I say these words. Because people don't want to have that discussion. They just want to say, well, Sam does this all the time, of what do you mean by God? You're like, well, what makes you think that I can put that into words? If I could, it's not God. I mean, it's literally in the Bible. Is if do not make graven images. Do not put it down into words. Do not put it into image. Do not try to define what this thing is, because as soon as you do that, you don't have it anymore. You've lost it the second you try to do that. There's an idea that from my life personally that I always use with the hyper rational atheists and with my own brain of the paralysis of analysis kind of thing, when you have unlimited choices and when you can't, just take a leap of faith. I didn't get my driver's license till I was 22. And I had my permit when I was 16. And I almost drove into oncoming traffic and I was terrified, and they still gave me my permit anyway, which was a terrible decision. And I didn't drive for like 5 years. And I went to a college in a college town. It was fine. I had friends who could drive. I was fine. And then I graduated and I had to student teach. And I was student teaching in a school 45 minutes away from where I was living. And so I kind of had to drive. So I took my driver's test 2 weeks before my start at the school. So I had to do it. And that's how I've lived most of my life, is forcing deadlines on myself to give myself motivation, because otherwise the plethora of choice keeps me from actually acting in fear of making the wrong choice and wasting my labor. Yeah. And so, but anyway, I get the license, and my mom, my friends would talk to me about, why are you you're fine at driving? Why is it scary to you? Everyone drives. Yeah. Everyone drives, and most people are really bad at it, and they're really dumb, and they're just not very like George Carlin has a joke where he says, think about how dumb the average person is, and then realize that half of people are dumber than that. And so all those people are driving. They have licenses. They're out there. And so you say, so I would say to my mom, when I was driving with my mom for my test, I would drive right next to the curb. I'm like, as far as you can go without actually being in the sidewalk. And she goes, just go to the center of the lane. It's okay. But come on, it's fine. Just go up there. As long as you don't cross the line, you're fine. And I go, no, there's 2-ton hunks of metal flying at me at 65 miles an hour right on the other side of that line. I'm just terrified every time I see it. And every time a car would come by, I'd and then go back and go back. And she said, no, it's okay. They're not going to cross the line. And I said, Mom, that line is paint. Cars, they can go up. Look, I went over the line. There's not a lot of places in my life where if I sneeze and go like this, I die. That's not common in the world. And I'm sorry, it's not irrational for me to be afraid of that. It's terrifying. 50,000 people a year die in car crashes. You're scared to fly. Far less people die in plane crashes than die in car crashes. You irrational fool. Just look at the map. But the thing is, you have to get on the road. Eventually you got to drive. Yep. And are you putting your faith in the spirit of the millions of people that are passing by you every day, and you hope that they haven't been drinking, and you hope that they're not texting, and you hope that they're not vaping, and you hope, the number of clouds I see coming out of cars as I drive by them these days, horrifying. But you got to do it. You can't just say, hey, because it's so much risk. It wouldn't make any sense to our ancestors. Yeah. If you went to your great-great-grandfather and said, come on, get in this car with me. And they're like, well, what is this thing? Like, oh, it's a giant chunk of metal. We're going to be flying really, really fast. Like how fast? Like, well, you know how fast you can run? It's going to be like 10 times faster than that. And maybe 50 times faster than that. And other people are going to be doing the same thing. Okay, so they're going like past us, like in the same direction. No, they're coming in the opposite direction, straight at you. Oh, okay, so there's like a wall between you, right? Yeah, sometimes. And sometimes we just paint the line on the ground, and we all promise each other that we're not going to go over that. So you guys get together and promise each other? No, we don't tell each other anything. You just kind of know that everyone's agreed to it. How do you know? Have you seen who teaches these people how to drive? Oh, I don't know, some random guy.
Their parents.
Their
People
parents
told them about Santa Claus.
exactly, who lied to them about Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy and the Easter Bunny. And like, these liars are called, and that's, you have to give them that benevolent lie. And they brought it up in the debates that the treating every gun as if it's loaded is a useful lie. Saying that people won't cross the line when they're driving toward you is a useful lie, because it is a lie. And you need to know that sometimes they might. But you don't need to be terrified of that, because if you live in fear of that, you live a much worse life.
Yep.
And it's better to have a 70-year life where you don't live in fear and you die in a car crash than to live a 95-year life where you're a hermit in your basement and you can never leave because you're terrified of someone crossing the line. But you can't escape fate, because I live on the second floor. I don't know who built this floor. I don't know if there's beams in between this. I have no idea. It's probably the cheapest person who bid on the job. It's probably the cheapest materials they could possibly buy. And I live here. I spend hours of my life. I sleep here. None of our ancestors would sleep in a place that was built hundreds of feet above the ground. Plenty of people live in skyscrapers built hundreds of feet above the ground. No ancestor is sleeping in a tree in a structure made of wood that some stranger they don't know made some unknown number of decades ago, and they never inspected once to see if it was of any kind of quality. They're just like, oh yeah, no, a lot of people that I don't know tell me that it's safe.
Yeah. And I get on that airplane and I don't want to live in a world in which dead white men controlled everything. Do you fly?
Yep.
You ever heard of the Wright brothers?
Yeah, you're tweeting that from your iPhone as well. Would you like to throw away your iPhone? Okay, cool. Would you like to throw away your pens, your headphones, your glasses? All of these things that have come from our ancestors, like be grateful, you ingrateful little craps. It's amazing. And there is nothing that any one of us can do with our life. Even Elon Musk is probably going to do more than almost anyone else living with his life. And Bill Gates, maybe eradicating malaria, pretty good way to live your life, but not better than every single one of our ancestors collectively. All of their efforts collectively is better than anything we could possibly do, and we throw it away at our peril. That's what Peterson said at the last lecture. You get rid of the Bible at your peril. You have to be careful of that, because there's so much in there. And you say, well, it could have been any book, and it could have been any structure, but it's not. It's not. Do it. And Sam, Sam says it with the moral landscape. I've done it with a cookbook. Yeah, but there aren't thousands and millions of people following your cookbook analogies. There's something better about this one. You go, well, no, I could write something just as beautiful. Then do it. Show us that you do it and get millions of people to follow it. Well, I wouldn't want to do that. Then do it with your hyper-rational atheism. Oh, wait, you can't, because people have been trying for 200 years and there's nothing there. There's thousands of people who follow it and find meaning there. That's great for your 1 to 5% of the population. That's probably all over 110 to 120 IQ, and probably all living in a Western society where they were raised in Western values already as a structure. So you blow out all your value structure, and what's left underneath is the programming from childhood of do unto others as you would do unto you, and be kind and live in love. And yeah, that came from somewhere. Because if you eradicate the whole value structure, what you're left with is our chimp DNA, where you're ripping off people's faces and taking whatever you want whenever you want it. And we don't want to live in that world. It took us a long time not to live in that world. We've barely been out of that world for just a few generations. It's not even close. I mean, even like early America was still really rough. We've had maybe 100 good years. And there's lots of good that happened, but average life is pretty good now in Western societies. And that was not true for almost all of history. The average life for every creature was unimaginable suffering. And now it's mostly suffering we're bringing on ourselves by throwing away the tradition of old. And there's plenty of suffering. It's the Peterson thing that always comes back for me, that you can have a world that is suffering and that is tragedy, but at least it cannot be hell. And that at least at the end of the day, there's no suffering that didn't have to happen. And your parents die and you're at the funeral and it's tragic and everyone's crying, but no one's fighting. And that's better than screaming at your sister about the $20 she owes you from when you went out to ice cream 3 weeks ago when you're at your father's funeral, and maybe that's not the best thing to be talking about. But you just, it's so hard to get past that. And it's so easy from our side to become judgmental towards those who aren't, instead of trying to offer a bridge. So again, I come back to the genesis of this, of there needs to be a bridge from the modern culture to Peterson. because I think that many of the people who are going to get there have gotten there. And I don't know how many more millions of people that can understand his message at surface value and are going to spend the amount of time they need to spend with him to get his message clearly. I don't know how many more of those people there are out there that are going to get captured by that kind of content. Maybe it'll double, maybe, but I don't think it's going to be all of America. I think there needs to be something, but he is serving as a bridge from the biblical side and the mythological side that's a little too deep to digest without his translation. But I think there needs to be something between there as well. There needs to be people like you who are interpreting Peterson as Peterson interprets the Bible, and then people that are interpreting Vanderklay as Vanderklay interprets Peterson as Peterson interprets the Bible, and you build up the hierarchy and you build up the structure and you spread that out, and that seems to be a valuable place to be serving in the world. But it also seems to be a very dangerous place. Tony Robbins had a great lecture once where he talked about how he made a decision when he was 18, something like that, as a kid, that he was going to live a life so that if he were to become famous, he wouldn't have to change who he was as a person to avoid any kind of disaster in his life. Because that power and that money and that fame and that sort of cult of personality that develops around you, if Peterson hadn't confronted his shadow, the temptation must be insane right now. I mean, just the number of college-age women who must be throwing themselves at him at the end of every event. You know, that alone, let alone the money, let alone the influence, being able to just there was after the Kathy Newman debate, there was a great, one of my, if not my favorite moment of Peterson, where they were accusing him of sending his army of right-wing trolls against her. And he said, they accuse me of sending an army of right-wing trolls. If I sent my army of right-wing trolls against you, you would know. There would be broken glass and blood in the streets. You'd be aware. Like, don't mess with it. I'm not sending them after anyone, and trust me, that's a good thing. You don't want anyone in my position who would. It's horrifying what I could do with this power, and I am profoundly grateful to have the mental capacity to be able to control that power. So I was saying to my partner the other day that, like, I'm so grateful that I met her when I did in my life, because if I had met her 5 years ago, I would not have been good enough for her, and I would have lost her. And that if I had made $1 million when I was 21, I probably would have lost my entire life to addiction and to disaster. And so I'm just now starting to feel like I process some of this stuff, but it's the start of that. And that's all. It's the restructuring of the dominance hierarchy. You know, you get to 6th grade and you're top of the field, and you're the most popular, biggest kid in elementary school, and then you go to middle school and you're bottom of the totem pole again. And you work your way back up, and then you get to high school and you're bottom of the totem pole again. And it's like I just started to figure out how to live my life, and then all this stuff just smashes through. The fist of God punches a hole through my spirit, and I've got to reconstruct everything from the ground up. And I'm sure that'll happen again in 2-3 years, and then every 3 to 5 years since then.
I have to cut you off because I got my 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
But this has been very enjoyable. So,
me too. For me too. Yes.
And I'll send it to you. And
of course. Yeah, I feel good about everything we talked about, so I think we're clear. Just go ahead and send it to me, and I'll listen through. And I'd love to catch up again sometime in the future and continue it, because
that'd be great.
Super helpful. Yeah,
that'd be great. Thank you. Now, how do you say your first name?
Topher.
Topher. Okay.
Yeah, like Christopher.
Christopher.
So, yeah, Christopher. Yeah. So I switched it later in life because there was someone else in my career field with my same first and last name who unfortunately who was very successful for 35 years and passed from AIDS about 20 years ago. So if you search for my name, that's what you see, is that I've been dead for 10 years. And it was not the most beneficial for my brand. So I switched around for the website and the email and all. It was mostly that decision. But it also was at a time when I was catalyzing personal change. And, I've seen that with the women in my life, the whole new hair, new me.
New names.
Like, there's something to that. There is the baptism, the ritual, like, anyway, to be continued. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
All right. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.